Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for today's conversation about the Honors College thesis. I'm Toni Doolin. I'm the Dean of the Honors College, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. Before we get started, I did want to point out that we're recording the event today because we had some folks who couldn't make this time but are interested in seeing a recording of the session. But no worries, we'll remove any identifying names and faces of our guests before we share that out with the folks who are unable to attend. We've put together a really terrific panel which represents several different perspectives on the thesis process. What we've decided to do is each member of our panel will give a brief introduction, but really we wanted to use this session as an opportunity for you to ask questions and get your questions answered. So as the panelists are talking, you can feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat, but we're also happy to have you raise either your virtual hand or your real hand if you've got your camera on. And then we'll go ahead and just take questions as they come up. And we did have quite a few questions that were submitted in advance. So if we have time, we'll try to get to those as well. Although based on looking at those questions submitted in advance, I think our panelists will address a lot of those. And I suspect that some of you in the room will have similar questions. To get things started, though, I did want to share a bit of context about the Honors College thesis and why we believe that it's such an important element of the Honors College experience. So for many of our students, the thesis is a little bit intimidating. Most of our students don't come to OSU having done that big of an independent project before. But the thing that's really important for us to share with all of you is that when we talk with our alumni, so our students after they complete their honors degree, what they will tell you is that one of the most important and most impactful experiences they had as an Honors College student was actually completing the research, writing and defending that thesis. And what isn't always clear to some of our students early on, but the thesis is really valuable, not just in terms of helping you with your professional or graduate school application or your resume for that first job, but the thesis really helps students build a unique and a really applicable skill set in things like communications, discipline, resilience, project management, as well as the skills associated with the research that they actually take on. And so while the students do become subject matter experts on a particular topic, they also learn a lot about themselves and their own capacity to take a major project that really is their own idea and their own project from conception to completion. And we think that the confidence and the skills really become a foundation to success no matter what the students do after graduation. However, it can be a challenging journey, and I suspect that some of the family members that are here today maybe have talked to their students and are here to figure out how they can best support their students in this challenging journey. But the thing we do want to emphasize today is we don't expect Honors College students to figure this all out on their own or to really be alone in that journey. And so that's why we put together this panel of some of the different folks that support students along the way. And so to get things kicked off, our first guest and panelist is one of the Honors College academic advisors, Bo Baca, who will share a bit about the structure that the Honors College has put in place to support student success through the thesis process. Bo?
Thanks, Toni, and hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's good to see you virtually. So yeah, I'll talk a bit about what we've done to make this big, potentially overwhelming process a little bit more manageable. Of course, I should say there are 4 academic advisors who work specifically with the Honors College students and work to support them on a personal level by getting to know them in our first meetings, trying to learn more about students' interests and goals, helping them develop those interests and connect with resources, and trying to establish a line of communication to support students all along the way. Everything from finding research opportunities to how do you send that awkward email to your mentor, reminding them to give you feedback on a thesis draft or something like that. So there's help on the personal level, but I think one of the cool things the Honors College has done structurally is to break the thesis process up into developmental stages. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen to give you an illustration of that. Let's see how this goes. Okay, can you see that? Let me move it. I put it in between my screens, and now let me try again. it's better if there we go. Okay. So thesis success in stages, or thesis as we call it. So the important thing here is there are 4 developmental stages for the thesis process. And within each of these, there are some well-defined tasks that students have to complete to demonstrate that they've moved beyond this stage. And they're meant to help students do the things that they should be doing, kind of dependent on where they are in the thesis process, where they are in their time at OSU, to move towards finding a project, finding a mentor, defining their project, and actually doing the research and getting it done. So let me start by showing you stage 2, because it has it's a good example to give. So we have what stage is all about, which is really figuring out what you're curious, what you're interested in researching, and then connecting with a mentor. That's really the big goal of stage 2. That's what we want students to come away from this with. And so there are resources here, past faculty research slides, where faculty from different colleges come and talk about their research. There is the Scholars Archive, which is really cool. This is a storehouse of all the honors theses that have been submitted, and you can search through them electronically. But then here are the tasks that I mentioned. So we want students to do these 4 things to help them move towards finding a mentor. One of them is reviewing a thesis, attending a research showcase where faculty talk about research, interviewing a faculty member, and then finally, the one that students love the most is doing an online research ethics training and then uploading their certificate of completion. So students can do these independently, or they can take a class that helps them to complete these stages. And I'll stop sharing for a moment so we can see each other again. So we have these stages, and we also have classes to support. And one important development is that all students starting this year are required to take a 1-credit orientation introduction to the thesis class within their first year at the Honors College. And this is really meant to help them develop their interests, get a sense of what resources are out there, and also build community and see that there are other students engaged in this process. The culminating task of stage 1 is that students create a plan of when they want to complete those remaining stages. And that's a really key element of the honors support we're providing structure with really clear goals, but also allowing students to have some agency and adapt it to their needs and interests. You know, are they going to go away, study abroad for a year, do an internship? When do they want to be done? What are they trying to accomplish? So the students set their goals. At the end of each term, we run reports to see if students have completed the stage, if they said that they were going to, and then advisors reach out and offer help if students haven't met those goals. And students can adjust that plan if needs be. So let's see, I think those are the high points of the support that's offered. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about that. So I think I will leave it there for now and pass it on to our next guest.
Thank you so much, Bo. Now I'm really pleased to invite 2 of our wonderful faculty mentors to share their perspective. And I will say, for those of you who keep up with the academic term, I think this is week 6. So we are just past the middle of the term. So it's a super, super busy time. So I really appreciate Monique and Regan taking time out to join us today. But first we have Regan Garang. He's a professor in the School of Psychological Sciences, as well as an associate vice provost and the executive director of the Center for Teaching and Learning here at OSU. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tony. This is a great. I love the fact that I can talk about some of this work, because I think in all the things that I do as a faculty member, working with honors college students are probably one of the most fun elements of the job. I also am right down the hall on the same floor as the honors college, which is particularly nice because if I have a conversation with a student, I can say, go right on down and ask that question there. And that happens pretty often. One of the reasons I like the Honors College, and one of the things that I share is I've worked with undergraduates for a very long time. This is my 24th year in higher education. For all of those 24 years, I've worked with undergrads. And for 20 of those 24 years, I've worked exclusively with undergraduates. And in many ways, I think what Bo talked about very much mirrors how I run my lab in general, which is why I think the Honors College is a really good fit for me. I love advising Honors College students because it nicely mirrors how I run my lab, which is have a group of really interested, hardworking students, help them find an idea and then help them do some empirical research on that, mostly experiments. I'm a social psychologist by training. My research areas are both in teaching and learning, and also in prejudice and judgment, particularly on how clothing influences how we are seen by others. And a lot of the students get drawn to that research. It's easy research to do, even during a pandemic when we can do it mostly online. And honestly, that's been one of the neatest things. Just last weekend, there was the Western Psychological Association conference that happened to be in our backyard in Portland. And 12 students from my lab presented posters at that conference. And three of them are Honors College students, one of whom will defend her Honors College thesis in about 3 weeks from now. So my whole model with mentorship is, for me, the story is easy. I just do what I do in my lab, which is the student comes in, we talk about research. My only criteria is that they are interested in something that is in the ballpark of what I know. Fortunately, it's a very big ballpark, so it's pretty easy for students to find a topic in there. And my model of mentorship is I often have the students join the lab so they can see the other research that's going on, see how it's happening. So when it comes time for them to do their own research, it's a lot easier. Here at OSU, I think we have a really nice undergraduate research environment. We have a program called URSA, which in many ways I think is a feeder for the Honors College, and you'll have the stats on that, but it seems to be, because I will have a student who will do an undergraduate research project, then join the lab, and then go, yeah, I think I want to join the Honors College, even if they haven't joined the Honors College from the get-go. So there are lots of different dimensions that I can go into with the questions, but I'll stop there with the big picture, but looking forward to any more questions that you have and talking about things anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Monique Udall from the College of Agricultural Sciences.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I'll second that. This is one of my favorite parts of the job as well, working with undergraduate students and watching them develop their ideas and their ultimate theses. My area of research is in animal cognition, behavior, and human-animal interactions. So also pretty broad. A lot of the work that we do is with companion animals. So people volunteer their animals to come do fun sorts of experiments and tests with us to look at the bond that they share with their animals. We do also, though, sometimes work with the production animals and look at their cognition and welfare in captive settings. And occasionally we work with zoo animals. I have one Honors College student at the moment who's gearing up to do her thesis with elephants at Wildlife Safari. So kind of a wide range and similar sort of approach as well. So we have a combination of faculty, graduate students, postdocs, and a very large body of undergraduate students who do work in our lab. And really, when students join our lab, often they start out helping with research that's ongoing. Sometimes those are graduate student projects or faculty projects, but in many cases, they might be helping with another undergraduate honors thesis project and assisting and learning the techniques. And then they can decide along the way if there's a particular niche or particular topic that they really find fascinating. We see if we can find a question that will suit their needs and also fit within the scope of what we do in our lab. And so we kind of operate as a unit, as a family, and there's a lot of mentorship that sort of comes from all angles, a lot of helping one another and growing not only in sort of that independent research, which is really important, but also in learning how to collaborate and communicate and share ideas and resources. And so I really enjoy it, and I hope that it makes for a good environment in general. I've been hosting Honors College students at OSU for about 10 years. And I really do enjoy it. And I'm happy to be here to be able to answer questions and encourage others to jump into this, because I think It's a really worthwhile experience for everyone involved, and the students are amazing. Oftentimes, students will not only complete projects that they can present on, but we've also had quite a few students publish their work as first authors in scientific journals. So that's definitely an option for those that have that goal in mind. But no matter what sort of that end goal is, I think it's a valuable experience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we thought it would be helpful, in addition to having kind of the faculty perspective and an honors college perspective, to have a recent alum and one of our current students share their perspective to kind of round out the panel. And so next I'd like to welcome Lucas Parvin. He is a zoology major who is planning to graduate this spring.
Planning, yeah, I hope so. Just kidding.
I wasn't going to commit you.
Yeah, I'll be graduating. Yeah, as I was introduced, I'm Lucas. I'm a zoology major. I'll be graduating this term, fingers crossed. I'm defending my thesis in also 3 weeks from now. And I will be submitting my my first draft, I guess, to my entire committee in about a week from now. I conducted research on bee communities and floral poor agricultural environments under the mentorship of Dr. Jim Rivers in the Forest Animal Ecology Lab. And in terms of my timeline, I reached out to him about 2 years ago, spent an entire year thinking about my interests, joining in on lab meetings, and developing an experimental design. And then I conducted all my field work last summer. And this entire school year, if you will, I've been doing data analysis, writing, and also processing a lot of specimens. And in terms of what I really gained from this experience, I learned how to go through the scientific process, which is simple on the outside, but there are usually a lot of obstacles to overcome, and I've kind of learned to deal with those. I've also learned to network with people in academia. I had to talk to a lot of farmers and network with them in order to get access to land. So I think that's really helped my communication skills. And ultimately, this whole process has just made me a better thinker and more resilient. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. And our final panelist is Amanda Fox. So Amanda Fox graduated in spring of 2021 with her degree in animal sciences. And I think she's going to talk about a thesis that was outside of her primary major. Amanda.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda. And as I was introduced, I'm an honors college alum and I graduated last spring. So now I'm currently a master's student here at OSU and I'm studying animal reproduction. My research now focuses on vitamin supplementation and fertility in beef cattle, but I actually wrote a novel for my honors thesis. So a little different than the stereotypical thesis that you might think of. I worked with a professor in the School of Writing, Literature, and Film. My novel is an experimental fictional work that focuses on mental and emotional disorders, as well as exploring gender relations and identities, abuse, trauma, and recovery. And then my thesis expanded to include a reflection on my writing process and the final product. And now I'm actually pursuing publication, so I'm super excited about that. In terms of my timeline, I started writing my novel actually at the end of high school, but I hadn't made much progress on it. I then found my mentor during my second year of college, and I immediately dove into writing a lot more and sending him chapters frequently. We kind of just went back and forth with chapters and edits and revisions. And I ended up actually changing the whole basis for my novel because he encouraged me to write true to myself and to not worry about what readers might think about it. And I think that helped a lot and made it way better. He also created a reading list for me, so I worked on that as well. I still ended up having to cram during my last couple terms, but that's because my novel is about 70,000 words and over 250 pages, and that's after revision and throwing out so much. So that makes sense. Unless you do a project like mine, it's pretty uncommon to have to write that much for 3 years. So don't worry about it. It's not going to have to be over 250 pages. I think the most valuable part of my experience was learning how to critically think about my own work and make changes as needed. My mentor would always tell me, this is your project and you don't need to take all of my suggestions or even any of them. So I had to learn how to take all of his notes, as well as notes I got from committee members and other people who read the novel, and then figure out what aligned with my goals and what didn't, and then figure out how to apply some of those suggestions. And this is an ongoing process that will continue until my novel is published. I will honestly probably never finish working on this novel, but those skills that I gained have also helped me a lot in grad school and in other areas of my life. Even though my project was way outside of the animal science field, the ability to write and edit and think critically about your work is so important in all fields. And I expect that this will continue to help me as I go forward. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you to all of our panelists. I think some great initial comments and really good perspectives. So with that, we're going to turn it over to kind of the question answer discussion portion. And so there's a couple different ways that you can participate. If you're more comfortable, you can open the chat and go ahead and put your question in the chat. And I think Kevin and I will help monitor that and then just ask those questions. If you're okay, you can raise your virtual hand, which is under the reactions, and it'll just show up in your Zoom box and we'll call on you and you can unmute and ask your question. And if your question is for a specific panelist, you can say that, but if you just want to put it out there, then we'll kind of navigate among the panelists who feels best prepared to answer that.
While folks are thinking of questions, maybe I'll bring in a question that was submitted in advance. Is there a guide for when a student should start? And I know that that's actually not a straightforward question and what start actually means. Bo, maybe you want to start off answering that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, you're right. There's not a straightforward answer to what start means. I think we encourage students in our stage 1 class in the first year to start keeping track of things that they find interesting, keep notes on things they hear in class or conversations, whatever things that kind of grab their interest, and start having conversations and meeting people. I think you should start doing that as soon as you land on campus. But you have some time before you really have to start, like, define your project and get going on your defined thesis project. From the perspective of an academic advisor, we really start to worry if students haven't done that, kind of midway or towards the end of their third year. That's when we kind of get into massive intervention mode and start trying to connect people with mentors. But yeah, I guess that's my answer to that.
If I can just jump in, even in my relatively short time with the Honors College, I've seen first-year students who have come into chat and say, I know I'm not going to start for a few years, but I wanted to start thinking about it. And actually, one's going to come in right after we get done with this, who's just starting to think about it, which is great. And quite honestly, I've seen the complete other end of the spectrum, where I mentioned the Honors College to a senior the second week of fall term. And she hustled and got her act together and is defending her honors thesis in 4 weeks from now. So I think it really varies with the individual. It's always nice when they come in earlier. While I'm rolling, let me just address one of the questions I half started typing out, but I figured this is easier. I think it also depends on how unique the idea is to the student. Whether, and I think the short answer is there's just so much variance in that I've seen amongst the honors students that I've spoken with in terms of how unique is the idea. I think I'm sure there are some faculty who would love to have mini-me's working on research that is, a big part of their ideas. But I know personally, I really try to push somebody to do something that is their own take on something, even if it is something that I've done. And I think that's that middle ground where more often than not, I will find students who will say, I really like this study you've done or this study that I've worked on. and here's a twist that I'd like to add to it. So I think that's really comfortable, because that way I already know the research and I can help them a lot better than somebody coming in with an idea on a topic that I don't know as much about.
So we have quite a few questions showing up in the chat. Let's see. Maybe the next one, what sort of approvals are needed? How long do they take? And is funding available if the project is purely a student's idea? I don't know, Monique or...
Sure, I can jump in on that. I think sort of building off of what was just said, it really depends on the idea and how similar or different it is from what the mentor is already doing. I think the idea of starting early for those students who are so inclined, I've had students reach out to me as freshmen who worry they might be starting too early, and I'm always very enthusiastic about freshmen reaching out if they're really interested, just to learn if this is what they want to do. But it also gives them a chance to see the kinds of research a faculty member is doing, with sort of what's in the scope of their realm of knowledge. And if it's something that requires IRB approval, and for those of you who might not be familiar with this terminology, IRB approval is typically an ethical approval you need to do research with human subjects, so if you have human participants. And then there's IACUC, which is approval you need to do research with animal subjects or participants. And then there are other trainings sometimes that you have to do depending on the subject matter related to the research. And so if you are working with the mentor or have chatted with the mentor, oftentimes they can guide the student on how simple or difficult it might be to get approval for a particular kind of project, because it really does depend on the project. If you're doing a very basic survey that poses very little risk to the participants involved, you might be able to get through that process relatively quickly, maybe in a matter of weeks to a month or two. If it is a very complicated experimental protocol that may pose some level of risk to the participants involved or the subjects involved, then that's going to be much more complicated. And the same goes sort of with the funding. So if a student is doing a spin-off of a project that's already being done in the lab, even if the question is theirs and maybe even the approach is theirs, sometimes those resources can be shared or funding can be expanded even internally, and that support can be provided that way. There's also a lot of wonderful opportunities at OSU to support undergraduate research. I've been really impressed working here with just how many different sort of areas you can apply for funding as a student researcher, and often as well faculty can point students in the direction of additional funding for that as well, and I'm sure the Honors College community can also help point students in that direction. So I think having that good communication, this is where good communication is important. If the student is talking with their mentor and talking with the other people that they have that are there to help and support them within this Honors College structure, they can get the things that they need. And then the sooner they sort of start that discussion, the more realistic it is that some compromise can be found or a mentor structure can be found to help them achieve their ultimate goals, or find a goal that fits within the realm of both addressing what they're really interested in and what's doable from the perspective of approvals and funding.
Yeah, and I should just clarify that students can never be the basically submitter author. So while they'll complete all the IRB or IACUC documentation and work with the mentor, the actual investigator is the faculty member. But because all honors theses are published, basically any research that's done that has human or animal subjects will go through that approval process. So it's another great learning opportunity. So I would like to hear from our students for this next question. Can you explain the defending your thesis part of the project? I know, Lucas, you haven't done that quite yet, but maybe you can talk about how you prep for it. And maybe Amanda, you can talk a little bit about what it looked like from the student perspective.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So basically you come up with a little speech, I guess, and it doesn't have to be very long. I think mine was maybe 20 minutes. And then you just kind of talk about, if this was a scientific thesis, you would probably talk about something like your results and, your objective and methods and everything like that. I talked about my experience with the writing process, kind of walked everyone through how I went about choosing my characters, and just talked about some of my experiences and, you know, some of the skills I gained, kind of like talking about it in this setting. And then I fielded a bunch of questions from my committee members and my mentor, and a bunch of my family and friends and other honor students also showed up. So they asked some questions. And then you go off for kind of a private meeting with your committee, and they ask you some more questions. And it's really not scary. I was really super nervous about it. And then they didn't ask me anything that I like couldn't answer in front of anyone. And then when we went off to have our own discussion, it was just a discussion, you know. They had already like prepared me really well for the defense. And so they weren't like grilling me. It wasn't like a final exam, an oral exam or anything like that. It was just more of a discussion. And then we went back with the main group and talked a little bit more. And then we just went and celebrated. So it's really honestly more enjoyable than it is scary.
Lucas, do you want to add anything about how you're preparing for your defense?
Sure. First off, I think I hope I have a similar experience. Right now, I'm still writing and creating the poster, but basically, I at this point know my work like the back of my hand, and my understanding is that I'm supposed to give about a 30-minute presentation, and then, like Amanda said, I'll field questions from the public audience, and then after that, I've been told I'll go for about an hour or maybe hour and a half, and my mentor jokingly said they will grill me, and they won't do it meanly, of course, but I think I'll need to defend all the statistical analyses and explain why something's independent or not independent, and yeah, that's my understanding of what I'm supposed to do.
And I can just add, from a historical perspective, in the time that I've been dean, we've never had a student who failed their defense. And I think in the history of the Honors College, there's only been a couple examples that I don't have personal knowledge of, but that I've heard, where a student went to the defense when the mentor suggested they weren't ready, which is never a good idea. So usually your mentors won't have you start your defense and schedule your defense until they are confident that you're ready for that. A couple questions that I think are good for Bo. Does the advisor monitor the status and phase that a student is at in relation to their graduation date? And then for those students who started before last year, so the current stage 1 class was not required, how is progress monitored with those students?
Sure, and I think I'll work backwards with those. So it was, the short answer, students who didn't take the class the same way, we still had the thesis plan as a requirement. It's just that we didn't have a full class. Students came to a 1-hour workshop instead and created a plan. So we've just extended the period where we're orienting students to the thesis and getting them thinking about it. But students still created a thesis plan where they set their goals for stages. And then primarily what we do is we check that students' thesis plan and against their completion of a phase. That's what we look at first. But we do require all students to come in annually for a progress check-in, where we really kind of dig in and look at their proposed when they're planning to graduate, how that relates to their stages, and we might talk with them about adjusting their plan. If the plan, sometimes they create that plan, winter of their first year, and they've totally forgotten the goals that they set, and they've been ignoring the emails we send them telling them that they haven't completed these tasks. So we bring them in and really kind of sit down and talk about whether these plans still make sense and try to get them on track. So I'd say yes, that does happen in advising appointments. But when we're running these reports using Salesforce data, it's primarily looking at their plan and when they told us they were going to complete the stage.
I see later on there was a postscript to that question asking about how mentors check in and approach monitoring progress for their students.
Yeah, and I was actually going to jump in on that side, because I'm sure it varies with mentors, but different students need different types of mentoring, and I always make it a point to very early on get a sense from the student of what type is best for them. There are some students who would like to meet every week. There are some students who like to meet every 2 or 3 weeks, and I work with the student to see what's best with them. I also use some software to help out. I put all my students into a program called Basecamp, where I put checkpoints in there, I put check-ins in there, and if a student hasn't checked in or checked one of my milestones for them, immediately I know I need to get in touch. And that's the way I do it, and that works pretty well. I think with the number of things that all of us faculty are juggling and balancing, if we don't keep a good track of things, it would be very easy to be at week 10 and go, oh, wait a minute, I haven't seen so and so for some time. So I've put a lot of things into place to nudge me to nudge the student.
Monique, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's pretty similar. It just, making sure you have some sort of structure in place to have connection with the student. And our lab, sometimes we also have different layers of mentorship. So even if a student is working primarily with me or another faculty member, there might be others in the lab too that they can check in with or that are having conversations with, whether they be students that there's an overlap in their projects, so they're helping one another and they can kind of touch base on how things are going, and graduate students. So having the sort of multiple levels of people helping and mentoring and being able to recognize when something might be dropped or there might be a gap in information or there's a struggle going on can really help as well, because as was mentioned, sometimes we get busy ourselves, and having the multiple sort of network approach can really make sure that everyone's taken care of and has what they need. Another big check-in point is lab meetings. So in many cases, labs have sort of weekly or bi-weekly gatherings where everyone sort of comes together and can touch base and see how the progress is going for everyone in the lab in general. That's another good way to sort of stay on top of some of those things.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question now about, is funding available for students to explore their interests? For example, if a student wants to attend a national conference to learn more, is there a way that they can get expenses covered for travel and conference registration? And Kevin, I know you weren't on the panel, but maybe you and or Bo can speak a little bit to that, at least from an honors college perspective.
Yeah, so the Honors College does have something called an experiential learning scholarship, which students can apply for to help support travel to a professional conference or thesis research expenses. The maximum amount of that is $750 currently. So it's not enough to carry a student usually through the entirety of their thesis experience, but it can provide a pretty significant help, particularly for a kind of discrete experience like traveling to a conference, or if there's some equipment that you need to purchase, for instance, that is not covered by your lab. We also have, for certain subject areas, particularly, we have funding that supports research partnerships between students and faculty. So we have something called the Deloach Scholarship, which goes out actually to all students, and faculty are eligible to apply for that twice a year to support research partnerships. And we have a summer research program specifically for students majoring in CLA programs, which generally often have less funding from the faculty member. And in many sciences, I shouldn't say many, but in some science-based research, there can be funding from a grant that the professor, the mentor might have that a student could fall under. I don't know if either of the students want to talk a little bit, because I know that the funding question can be tricky because it is a big time commitment to do your thesis, certainly, and sometimes you have to make trade-offs.
Yeah, I applied for the experiential scholarship, and luckily at the time the maximum award was $1,000, and that actually I got to use that to fund rentals from the motor pool to get a motor pool vehicle, because I had to do a lot of driving this past summer, and I didn't have a vehicle that was going to be able to haul the equipment I had to haul. And I mean, at least my mentor in there in his lab, he was able to supply me with like most of the equipment and everything, but I was able to use that scholarship to help out as much as I could. We needed a bee taxonomist to identify like 1,500 samples because I couldn't identify all of them to like species level. And so I was able to cover that with the scholarship. So there is funding available, at least that one, which I was lucky enough to apply for and receive.
I also got the Honors College Experiential Learning Scholarship to purchase a new laptop, because it was my senior year and a couple terms away from finishing up my project, and my laptop decided that it was done. And so, of course, you know, how do you write a novel without a laptop? So I applied and got it.
Bo, I don't know if you have anything to add, just based on students you've advised who kind of struggled trying to figure out the finances of either exploring or actually taking on and completing their research.
I don't really have anything to add to what's been said.
So a question that came in to me regards how I think really a thesis is approved. Who is it that determines when a thesis is finished, and how are those standards established? I would just introduce this before handing it over to our panel by saying that the Honors College will look at some formatting pieces, but we are not the judges of whether a thesis is strong in the particular discipline that the student is writing it in, or is up to the standards of that discipline. So that is something that primarily is negotiated between the student and their mentor. And maybe I'll hand it over to our mentors to talk about how they reach that stage and what standards are set for an undergraduate.
My fingers on the buzzer. So I think that the key thing that we haven't actually mentioned in the conversation so far is that the student also has a committee of 3. So that's the mentor and 2 others. And I'll say that, and then I'll go on to say that in all the honors theses that I've been part of, the mentor is doing the humans work of the bulk of the advising and the checking and the reading drafts and so on. But the direct, I guess, answer to that question is that group of 3 individuals has to deem that thesis is suitable. And I think for better or for worse, is suitable is up to those 3 individuals. And there is a lot of disciplinary variance. You know, and when I hear about what Amanda did with her book, I mean, it's very different from what we would do in the social sciences. The good news is in the social sciences, with all the projects that I supervise, we basically use it should be good enough to be submitted, or it should be close to be good enough to be submitted to a journal. And in fact, an honors student who defended her thesis in the fall of this year actually got her honors thesis accepted in a peer-reviewed psychology journal. So it was good enough for a journal because it got accepted. That sounds scary, but I think, like we said earlier on, that's what the Honors College is all about, is doing really good work. And it's just great to see students do that. So.
And the process is pretty similar in our department as well. You have a committee, and probably the expectations vary, by, who your committee members are and what your thesis is in, and sort of the standards of a particular field. That you learn all of that through the process. That's part of it, is learning what the research field is about and what science looks like from that perspective, or what another, project or scholarship looks like from the perspective that you're approaching it. And sort of what it is that you need to learn to do that work. And so I think it's very similar, and you have conversations all along the way with your mentor and your other committee members and others who are maybe working in your lab or your group about what a successful thesis looks like. And so you won't make it to the end, and well, hopefully you won't make it to the end and be left wondering about, are you going to be successful or not. That's part of the process, is getting there along with the help and support of others, including your mentor. And so, yeah, you can get to the point where you can have work that is publishable or is representative of scholarly work in your field. And that's a great goal to have. And I've noticed an increasing number of students have that goal and have been able to do things like publish and present at conferences. But even just the process itself allows you to understand the work more deeply and understand your subject matter more deeply. And so you'll have good indicators along the way of how you're progressing and doing well before you get there.
I'll just add a quick note here. It was mentioned earlier that the honors theses are published in the open access scholar archives. And so kind of as I describe it to my students that I've mentored, even if there aren't plans immediately to try to publish in a journal or in a conference proceeding, my name and their name is on that document in scholar archives, and it's accessible, and all sorts of researchers go to that. And so those are published works that are out there for the world literally to see. And so there's definitely the vetting that happens, that by the time the final document is signed and published to scholar archives, the committee and the student feel really good about it. The only other thing I wanted to add that might come to mind is, what if a student and a mentor or committee are kind of struggling to come to a consensus on something? And that's a point in time where a student would often reach out to their honors advisors, or sometimes directly to me or the honors associate dean, and then we just help them navigate, because like any relationship, it can be complicated. That happens very rarely. Again, in my tenure, I think I've only had to intervene a couple times, helping a student, an honor student, and a faculty mentor kind of get on the same page with regards to schedule and completion. There is a question. If a student falls out of the HC for a period of time due to requirements, can they continue working on their thesis during that time when maybe they're not in the honors college due to GPA or other honors requirements? So Bo, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And this is actually different this year than it has been in the past. We've made some big adjustments to our satisfactory progress requirements in honors college. Basically, we do not remove students from the honors college if they wish to be in, even if they are not making progress. We talk with them. Advisors make clear, hey, this is where your GPA needs to be by the time you graduate. Here's the likelihood of you getting there, but it's their decision. If they find value in remaining in the honors college, we're going to support them. And so it's, in the past, it was the case that if students were delinquent with like thesis progress or GPA, things like that for a couple of terms, they would be removed. And it was fine for them to continue working on their thesis and then rejoin. So it's a little different answer to that question, but the main thing is we want to support those students. So if students are falling behind, you can be assured that their advisors are reaching out to them via email, text, whatever way we can to try to get a hold of them. If we don't, then we might reach out to their mentors and try to figure out a way to keep them moving forward.
Yeah, and I just like to remind everyone that while the Honors College has a really structured process for the thesis in particular, there are students who aren't in the Honors College that undertake undergrad research. Oftentimes, they don't necessarily have a requirement to write a thesis about that research. So if a student is finding value in doing and undertaking research, even if they chose to leave the Honors College, it would really be up to the faculty mentor and the student if they wanted to continue that and what sort of form it might show up in at the end. So actually, I think in another week or so, the Celebrating Undergraduate Excellence Fair is happening, and a number of students, in addition to Honors College students, will have typically posters about the research that they've done while they've been an undergrad student at OSU. Kevin, are there other questions that I missed?
Yeah, so this is a pre-submitted question, and we've skirted around this a little bit, but one of the major sources of concern, I think, is often how you actually find that mentor. So maybe the students can talk a little bit about how they found their mentor, but Bo, maybe you could also talk about our research showcase events.
So I had started I took the stage courses, and so they expected us at certain points in time to reach out to potential mentors. And so mainly I just sent a bunch of emails trying to get someone to have further communication with me. And I met with several different people. And then I went to a faculty research showcase. And that's where I first met my mentor. And I thought that his, I guess, area of work was really interesting and some of the things that he talked about. But I wasn't really sure that he was going to actually support my project. And so I talked to him a little bit, but I was like, I don't know. And then I was talking to my advisor in my in animal science, actually, about what I wanted to do. And so she started looking for me as well, and she connected with him. And so then that's how we started. And then he asked that I take a class from him to make sure that I was on par with writing, I guess. And then that's how we started.
I have maybe a weird way of finding my mentor, but I had like a bit of a career pivot or interest pivot my sophomore year. And broadly, I decided I'm interested in ecology. And so I like reached out to a bunch of professors in the field of ecology. I went to a research showcase, and then I got involved in the URSA research. And I did some work through URSA, and I really liked my mentor, but I didn't like the work all that much. It wasn't totally my thing. But just like through, I think, networking with a bunch of different people, I was able to get involved in multiple labs and end up working in 3 different labs. And I mean, the one mentor I had the least contact with is now my thesis mentor, because I really had to decide on my thesis during the pandemic. And so it was nothing but virtual stuff, whereas the other mentors I met was in person. So I think there are a lot of strategies that work, and it just takes reaching out in one way or another, going to events. So.
And the research showcases that Kevin and Lucas just mentioned are these events where we invite faculty from different academic colleges to give a quick presentation on the research that they're engaged in. And actually, the person in this room, Bailey Garvin, does a lot of work putting those together as well, who's our student engagement coordinator. But then we also have past slides from research showcases, which are available on the Stage 2 page that Kevin linked out to you earlier. And those are a chance for students to, depending on where they are, sometimes students will go in their first year just to get a sense of what research is happening, just to kind of absorb it. But it's meant also be a chance for students to actually, go up and talk with a faculty member after they've talked about the research and make a connection. And that happens pretty frequently, where a student will talk with a faculty member, they'll exchange emails, and then develop a thesis project from there.
I was just going to offer as well that anytime an advisor in the Honors College meets with a student and the student's kind of struggling to figure out either what they want to do or where faculty members are at OSU that might be good contacts for them, students will have meetings pretty frequently, either with myself or Susan Rogers, who's our associate dean. So my faculty line is in engineering, but I've been at OSU a long time and I've gotten to meet faculty across all the colleges. And then Associate Dean Rogers is from the College of Liberal Arts. And so usually between the two of us, we have in our network faculty that might be a good starting point. And the way that I usually manage that is I'll send an email introducing the faculty member to the honor student, and then just ask the honor student to take it from there. And I think that helps out a lot, because sometimes that first email to a faculty member a student doesn't know can feel a little intimidating. And so by us making that connection, I think it just takes that, eases that first step. But that we see that as a fundamental part of our job. Advisors can do a similar thing where they can reach out directly to a faculty member they know and introduce the student to the faculty member. So for those of you who have students maybe that are struggling a little bit, the most important thing from my perspective that you can do is just tell them to reach out to their Honors College advisor or to myself or to Associate Dean Rogers, because I guarantee you, typically within a matter of weeks, we can get them connected up if just getting that connection with a faculty member is kind of their stopping point. Kevin, any other questions, or is there anything any of the panelists want to jump in on, because we're nearing our ending?
I just want to hit something that nobody's asked a question about or mentioned and often goes unsaid. Just because you've started with one mentor doesn't mean you're stuck with them. And I say this because not everybody gets along with everybody. And even with the nice examples that Lucas and Amanda mentioned, and there was some great examples, even when you connect with somebody, that doesn't, the relationship and the fit may not be great. And I think the Honors College, from what I know, or believe and understand from students, is really great to have those conversations. So it's not over, and I think the key is, just because you've sunk a little bit of time in it, don't waste the rest of your time in it. It's sometimes better to just, do that. So
yeah, and I think Bo mentioned earlier, we're very good at helping students figure out how to communicate with a faculty member when it's just not working out, and that even happens at the graduate level. So faculty members, their egos are not easily bruised. So it's usually a very manageable situation if a student needs to switch. And oftentimes we find that those folks are actually the ones that help connect them to the right person at OSU. So again, going back to the very beginning, this is really about providing a support infrastructure to allow students to navigate the research part of the university, which is really big and it's really complex. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I'd like to thank our panelists so much for making time to participate today. Again, given how busy it is in the term right now. And hopefully you're all convinced that the success in the thesis process is truly a community effort. It definitely takes an entire village to help our students get through to that thesis completion. I also want to do a quick shout out to our Honors College Parent and Family Leadership Circle. They have really been the inspiration for organizing these sorts of events, and members of our Parent and Family Leadership Circle also provide gifts that support access scholarships. And so they play a really important role in helping students actually stay in the Honors College and be able to have these transformative experiences. If anybody on today's call is interested in learning more about our Parent and Family Leadership Circle, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Kevin Stoller, or you can also reach out to Kelly Parker, who I think is here. I saw her earlier, and she's a member of the OSU Foundation and supports the Honors College directly. So that's it. I hope you guys all have a wonderful afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And again, thank you to our panelists.